Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Abraham Bedoy, and I'm the Legal Outreach Coordinator with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. So thank you for joining our two-part series where we're going to talk a little bit about DACA. Through this first recording, we're going to give an overview of the program, the current status of the program, and just some helpful next steps that potential DACA recipients can take when they're thinking to apply to the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. In our second video, we'll also invite folks to tune into that. We'll be doing a deeper dive into how folks can sort of prepare to apply for the first time. What are some tips folks can take into account when they're trying to prove each requirement with documentation? Because we know there's a lot of confusion in the community related to that. Having said that, though, I want to just introduce my colleague, Veronica Garcia, who's going to be walking us through all this information. She is a staff attorney here at the ILRC and also our DACA team lead. Vero, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Abraham. Excited to have this conversation with you and go over some of the requirements for DACA as well as how individuals could prepare in order to seek advice on how to apply for DACA.
No, I am too. I wish we could be in person doing this, but obviously with COVID, we're doing the best that we can. But I'm also excited to be with you today. So, Veronica, I think that right now in the community, there's a lot of questions related to DACA. I mean, over the last 4 years, there's been a lot of uncertainty regarding the program. There's been a lot of ups and downs. And I think before we can even get into more substance about the program, it's important to just give the community an update, an overview of where exactly we are right now. So having said that, do you think you could just briefly just give us maybe where we've been and the current status of DACA? And I think that will just be helpful in sort of framing the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I know that the past 4 years, we've seen a lot of changes to the DACA program. There's, been a lot of uncertainty. First, we have it back. First, we don't have it back, right? It only allows for renewals. Now we have allowed for initials. So I could understand why the community right now doesn't really get what's happening and what the future of DACA could be. So just to give a little background, right, as we know, the DACA program was terminated by the Trump administration in 2017. There were a lot of legal battles around how the DACA program was terminated, whether he had done it the right way or incorrectly. We saw that go all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in June of 2020, we finally saw a restoration of the program, where the Supreme Court stated the way the Trump administration had terminated the program was not done the right way, right, as the law asked for it to happen. What I do want to make clear is that they didn't decide whether the program itself was lawful or whether it was legal, right? They just decided as to whether it was terminated right. And I want to explain that because, as we will see, there's still some challenges to the DACA program that we'll discuss in a bit. But essentially, after we had the Supreme Court decision, we didn't actually see any applications be accepted by USCIS, who processes the DACA applications, until the end of last year, when the federal court in New York finally ordered the USCIS to start accepting initial applications. What that meant is now we have the ability, or the program is open for individuals who never had DACA, right? So they're applying for the first time. Individuals who have DACA or had DACA at some point in the past, they're now able to submit renewal applications, as well as the ability for DACA recipients to apply for advanced parole if they meet certain program requirements. So that's what we have now. We unfortunately still have some things to look out for when it comes to the DACA program around how it will continue and whether it will continue. Like I mentioned, right, the Supreme Court decided on whether the program was terminated lawfully, not whether the program itself was lawful, right? There is a pending case in Texas right now arguing whether the program is legal or not, whether it's lawful or not. And we're waiting on a decision from that judge. Depending on how it decides, it could mean that the program ceases to exist how we know it right now. So applicants should be on the lookout for that decision as they are continuing to apply for the program and see if they're eligible for the program.
No, thank you, Veronica. I kind of want to take a pause and focus on the last items that you mentioned. I think it's great news. I mean, I think for us, it's sort of music to our ears, right? That folks are able to apply for a DACA for the first time again. But if I understood correctly, the DACA program, I think sometimes we think that it's permanent or that it's here to stay forever. But there are still some pending litigation and some pending court cases that could potentially hurt the DACA program. So that means that we must to continue to be vigilant, but also continue our advocacy efforts to protect all immigrants, which includes DACA recipients, right?
Yeah, that's definitely correct, right? As we saw in the last 4 years, right, the program is basically it could be changed by a new administration, right? So it was created by the Obama administration. He supported it for the years that he was in office. Then when Trump came into office, he decided that, this isn't the type of program that should continue. So then it was terminated. And even though it was brought back by courts, there's still this legal challenge in Texas, right, around whether the program should continue or not. And depending on what that court decides, we could see that the program will either continue as we know it or will not continue, right? So the program right now is basically, dependent on what administrations decide and what, some courts might decide if they are brought a challenge to the program. And this is because DACA is impermanent, right? It's just a program. It's not written into law. So people have to be on the lookout to how it might change and how new requirements or requirements might shift a little as they continue to access the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think another follow-up question to that is, I know for some folks they've had DACA since 2012, right? They've been renewing it for some time, so they're experts when it comes to DACA. But for folks who are applying for the first time and maybe a little bit confused on what DACA exactly is, can you just sort of help demystify that, like what DACA is, but more importantly, what DACA isn't? Because I think sometimes in the community, folks think that I apply for DACA, that means in a couple of years I'm going to get a green card or I'm going to become a citizen. And we just want to make sure that folks get the correct message, what it means to actually have deferred action through the DACA program.
Yeah, there is a lot of confusion, and a lot of questions I get from community members is whether DACA would allow them to get, permanent protection, will allow them to get a green card, will allow them to become U.S. citizens. And unfortunately, the program does not do any of those things, right? So the program, it stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, right? So it gives people protection from deportation on a 2-year basis, right? It basically defers any action of being removed and enforcement against them while they have this protection, right? When someone gets that 2-year protection, right, they're able to apply for a work permit and they're able to apply for a state ID or a driver's license within the state, and they're able to work as long as they have that program. Being in DACA status, you could think about it as being on a circular path, right? Because you continue to have the same thing for as long as the program exists, right? So someone applies for DACA, they're granted DACA, they're able to renew, and they continue to do that every 2 years while the program exists, right? On the other hand, when someone has some type of protection or they're able to apply for lawful permanent status, we think about this as being on a path towards something, right? Because you're not in the same stream. You can think about it in the same circle. Usually someone who has the ability to apply for a benefit that leads to lawful permanent status then allows them to apply to be United States citizens, right? And then the benefits that comes with that. DACA doesn't put you on that path, right? You need something else to put you on that path. And DACA will never, at least that's how it exists right now, will never allow you to be on that path, right? So DACA doesn't mean having a green card. It doesn't mean eventually being able to apply for U.S. citizenship, right? It doesn't mean being able to give protection to other family members, right? Mm-hmm. It's just that 2-year protection that you're given.
Thank you. And I think that helps clarify for community members. I know when we go into the community, we get a lot of these questions, and I think that this sort of helps set the stage and folks just are a little bit more aware of what exactly they are applying for. Having said, I know now we set the stage. We gave an overview of where DACA is and what the current status of DACA is. But I know many folks who may be tuning into this video want to decide or want to sort of strategize if they're eligible for the program. So I was going to ask you if you could just briefly go over the requirements. Or I think another question the community gets a lot is, have the requirements changed now? I mean, this program began in 2012. We're now in 2021. Is it the same requirements as was the original 2012 program?
Yes. So the program requirements are the same as they were in 2012. Those haven't changed. So people who have older siblings who are documented or have received DACA might be familiar with what is required. There are 7 eligibility requirements for DACA, and these eligibility requirements, as we'll talk a little bit more later, could be difficult to prove by some individuals. And a lot of people get frustrated because there's very little wiggle room in meeting these requirements, right? So people sometimes maybe they got here a year after, the program requires them to be here. So I'm going to go over them, and just keep in mind that they are created by, the program by USCIS, and you have to be able to prove that you meet these requirements, right? So to apply for DACA and to be eligible for DACA, you have to first show that you were born after June 15, 1981, or that you were under 31 when the program was announced. You have to show that you arrived here before the age of 16, right? And that you arrived here and started living your life here, right, before the age of 16. You have to show that you've been continuously residing in the United States since June 15, 2007. Now we're talking about 14 years. You have to show that you've been here for the past 14 years. You have to show that you were physically present the day that the program was announced, which was June 15, 2012. And you have to show that you were undocumented or had no lawful status on June 15, 2012. Additionally, you have to show that you meet certain educational requirements, which we'll go in more detail into them later. And you have to show that you haven't been convicted of certain crimes.
Great. And a question, because I think that giving an overview is helpful, but I think right now you mentioned education, continuous residence, some other requirements that may be a little bit more difficult or may have some extra parts for folks to understand. Do you mind going into a little bit more detail on the sort of requirements that many folks in the community sometimes have questions on? For example, again, age, continuous residence, education requirements, et cetera. Just again, so we set the stage for community members who are thinking about applying.
Yeah, definitely. When we break down the requirements, you can think about them. You have to meet, requirements in 4 different areas, right? Or 4 different buckets. The first one is age, right? For someone to be able to apply for DACA, they have to show that their birthday, they were born after June 15, 1981, right? So everybody who was born, July from 1981 forward would be eligible for the program. Right? People born before that date would not be eligible for the program. An easier way to think about it is, were you under 31 when the program was announced in June 15, 2012, right? So how old were you that summer would tell you whether you're eligible to apply for the program or not. The other age requirement is that you have to show that you came to the United States before the age of 16, right? So the program in its title says it's for childhood arrivals. That's how the government defined, right, individuals who entered before the age of 16. This means that you will have to have some sort of proof showing that when you first came to the United States, when you were living in the United States, you were under this age. The second or the third thing you have to prove under age is that you are now at least 15 years old to be able to apply for the program, right? So those individuals who are under 15 will have to wait until they reach the age of 15 to be able to apply for DACA. There is an exception to that, right? So people who might have some sort of case in immigration court or were at one point in immigration court and they're under 15 might be eligible to apply now as long as they meet other program requirements, right? So that's the first area of eligibility age, right? So did you come here before 16? Were you under 31 on June 15, 2012, when the program was announced? And are you at least 15 now to apply for the program? The other area of evidence or a requirement that you have to prove is that you've been here continuously present at least since June 15, 2007, right? For this, the government will ask you to show that you've been living here in the United States through documentation, right? Or were you enrolled in school, right? So you could show them your school records. Do you have a lease and you were renting an apartment so you could show them that? And you'll have to prove that you were here with a document for every 3 months, we could say, or, every couple months throughout the year. A lot of people think that they'll just need one document to show that they've been here for that year, but you will need more than that, which we'll talk a little bit more about in our second video as to how to prove this. The other area that you'll have to prove is that you meet the education requirement, right? And this individuals could show if they're enrolled in school right now, right? So you're actively getting your high school diploma, right? You might be a senior in high school and you're about to graduate. You could show records that you are in school. For those people who already have graduated or maybe are getting an education through a different path, right? They could show their high school diploma. They could show that they're enrolled in a program that's letting them get their, their certificate of education, their GED, or they're doing some sort of vocational program that meets the requirements, right? The last thing that you'll have to show is that you haven't been convicted of certain crimes. And this usually means if you have some contact with the police, that contact or that interaction wouldn't bar you from applying for DACA. If you don't have any of that, you don't have to worry about it. But if you do, you have to get that analyzed.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful to hear. And as we're speaking, I'm hearing all these requirements, a lot of sort of nuance, right? And I think it's sometimes said among practitioners that immigration law after tax law is one of the most complicated. And I think as I hear you speak, Vedo, I hear all the nuance and all the complications related to DACA and just related to immigration law more generally. So I think I want to talk a little bit about just where folks could seek assistance, because after hearing this, let's say I'm a DACA recipient, right? And I feel like, man, I think I qualify for all these requirements. I think the next logical step for me is to find someone that could help me complete this application so I could try to obtain DACA status. Can you talk a little bit about where or who community members should be looking for assistance to complete the DACA application? And just to add a little bit more context to that question, I live in the Central Valley, and I know I speak to partners all the time. They talk a lot about immigration fraud, and that a lot of our community members unfortunately become prey to bad actors that are just, again, preying on our community. So I think hopefully through this question, we can help sort of just demystify where folks could reach out so they don't become prey to immigration fraud.
Yeah, definitely. And, unfortunately, I've heard a lot about people going to different individuals or hearing things from their neighbors or their family members and them thinking that they are ready to apply for whatever benefit they're seeking, right? And with DACA, since we know that a lot of families have older siblings who have applied for DACA already, or they know someone who has DACA already, a lot of people might choose to go forward and submit their own application and do their own process, and we get that. But even though the process seems pretty straightforward, we always think it's really important to go and speak to someone that could do an analysis of your case, because like Abraham, like you mentioned, immigration law is pretty complicated, right? And even though DACA, you look at the 7 requirements and you think, oh, those are pretty simple to meet and submit documentation to help me in my case, you still want to make sure that there isn't something in your case that might put you at risk, right, of being denied and losing your filing fee or having other unpleasant situations come forward, right? And reaching out to someone who works in the legal field sometimes could be a little intimidating. So we might go with someone that our, family member recommended, or someone else that we know in the community that has helped us with a different process. And they say they also do immigration applications. And we know that that's an avenue, right? But I do want to make clear and talk a little bit about the fraud that does happen in immigration law. Because it's really confusing and a lot of things have changed in the last 4 years. You want to make sure that you go with someone who has been keeping up with the changes of DACA, who knows what has changed in the policy, how USCIS might be processing applications. And here, in the United States, there's 2 types of individuals who actually could give immigration advice and help analyze your case and help you prepare your case. And that's one, an immigration attorney, right? The immigration attorney has to have an active license to be able to practice law. And sometimes it's a little intimidating to see, how do I find this information? Where do I search? Sometimes a simple Google search could tell you, where that person is licensed and whether they're able to practice and what type of law they practice, right? So if I want help with my immigration case, I'm not going to go with a tax attorney, right? I'm going to try to find someone who does immigration law, right? So that's one individual that could help. Another type of individual that could help with your immigration case or your DACA case is a DOJ accredited representative, right? So in immigration law, there's certain people who have been certified by the Department of Justice to practice immigration law, to give legal advice around immigration, right? Those are the only 2 type of individuals who could give advice around immigration and could help you with your immigration case. And as you're getting ready to apply, I would encourage people, if they can, to go and speak with these individuals who are able to give this type of advice so that they could do an analysis on your case, right? They can make sure that your case is adequately prepared and also answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you for that. And just we're going to switch a little bit, switch gears right now. I want to talk a little bit about red flags. I know that not everybody, unfortunately, will be eligible for DACA. We know that folks who have had some contact with the criminal legal system or have some other sort of bars to DACA may not be eligible. So I think, at least from my personal experience, two sort of items I hear a lot in the community are travel. Like let's say I traveled, I traveled back to my home country. I came back. I know that not all travel automatically makes you ineligible for DACA, but I was wondering if you could just give us like an overview on what folks should watch out for when it comes to that red flag of traveling if you want to apply for DACA.
Sure. So first around travel, right? Like I mentioned with the DACA requirements, you have to show that you've been here continuously since 2007, since June 15, 2007, right? That means that you have to show USCIS that you have been living here, that you haven't left the country, right? Or, what they call in immigration law, broken your continuous residence, right? That you have been here and you deserve to be granted this type of relief, right? For travel, right? USCIS or the government has given basically some leeway for travel that might have happened between June 15, 2007 and before August 15, 2012, right? So travel that happened within that time period, if it was short, right? If you only went for a short amount of time for something that was really specific, there's a possibility that you could still show that you have been living here and that you meet the requirements for DACA, right? For any travel that happened August 15, after August 15, 2012, that could or will deny you DACA eligibility, right? So you won't be able to apply for DACA. And, there's a lot of gray room between there. People might not be sure if their travel would, bar them for DACA or it would count as something that happened as a short period of time and really brief. So people who did travel, after June 15, 2007, I would suggest that they go and they speak with an immigration attorney or a DOJ accredited rep just to make sure that, they could file for DACA. They're still eligible for DACA and they won't get their application denied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Veteran. I think another question that we hear is for folks who have had contact with the criminal legal system, whether that be have had spent time incarcerated, had a certain criminal conviction, and I know that giving a cookie cutter answer is not plausible, just because, like we said, immigration law is very case specific. But are there some tips that you could give to folks who have had that negative contact before they speak to a legal service provider? Are there documents they should bring to their initial appointment just so the advocate who can help them is just a little bit more well versed on their case?
Yeah. So it is always scary when you have contact with immigration or with the police, right? Or law enforcement, or you're stopped when you're driving. And people always want to know, how does this affect my DACA case, right? There's certain things that will prevent you from applying for DACA. And there's certain things that might not prevent you from applying for DACA and you're still eligible. You just have to show how it doesn't bar you for DACA, right? I don't want to go into the details of what that is because it gets really confusing, like you said, Abraham. And so I would, tell people who are looking to apply for DACA and maybe have had interaction with law enforcement, right? That means either, a police officer asked them to come down to the police station, right? Or they had to go to court, right? Because of some sort of violation, right? Or they have been fingerprinted, to go and get as much information or to get those records so that they could take them to the individual, the advocate that's helping them apply for DACA, and they could do that analysis as to how this might impact their eligibility for the program, right? So people who have had some sort of contact, I would suggest that they go and to the court where they had their case and ask them for their record, right? I would suggest them to go to the police department if there was actually a case against them and get that record so they could take it to their appointment. I would also suggest that, even if it was a citation, right, where you was stopped when you were driving, but you're not sure as to whether it was just like a simple traffic ticket or if it became something else, to get records of that and take them to your advocate that's helping you with your case. For individuals who might not know, right? But they know that they had some interaction. They don't know what happened to it. They don't know where it was. You could also get help in requesting your FBI record, right? And that shows if you've been fingerprinted, what actually came of that case or what you were fingerprinted for as a starting point. There might be a need to get more documentation before you're able to apply for DACA. But if you're able to get these basics when you go in and speak to an advocate, they'll be able to give you a better understanding of how it might impact your case and what else you might need before you apply.
Great. I think these are very helpful next steps and tips to folks who are thinking about applying. So now that I think we've given an overview, we talked about the requirements. I want to talk to you a little bit, let's say I was a potential DACA recipient and I'm interested now in applying. And again, we're talking about connected to a trusted legal service provider. When I make the call to sort of set up an appointment, can you just, I know each office kind of has their own practices and their own protocols, but generally speaking, what is the application process? I imagine there's a pre-screening stage to sort of establish eligibility, but what can folks expect once they sort of make that appointment with the legal service provider? Maybe talk a little about the fee also, so folks are aware how much it costs to apply for DACA.
Yeah, definitely. So like you mentioned, Abraham, every office is going to have a different process on how they take on clients, right? On how they screen them, what documents they might need, the first time they come in, or what documents, they will be given, right? Or requested. But we think about a general process that every DACA applicant will go through as they move forward to apply for DACA, right? So the first thing that should happen when you go into to talk to an advocate about whether you're eligible or not eligible for DACA is, get screened, right? So we just went through the 7 requirements, right? The advocate will screen you to make sure that you do meet those 7 requirements. They will also screen you to see if there's any potential red flags, right? Or any things that they should, that might put you in danger of being denied or of making your process longer, right? So they'll look out for those things. And at that point, it would be great also if that advocate screens you for other relief, right? So we talked about how DACA doesn't lead to anything permanent, right? At that point, they might also ask you questions to check whether you would be eligible for something that would give you a green card, right? So that's kind of like the first step. Once they determine that you are eligible for DACA, the advocate will most likely ask you to gather documents, right? So for those 7 requirements, you have to submit documentation to show you actually are eligible for the program, from your identity to your schooling to whether you have a criminal record or not, to the 14 years of being continuously present here in the United States. Right. Once you have gathered those documents and you come back and they are reviewed to make sure there aren't any missing pieces, then probably the advocate will ask you to fill out the forms, right? So there are certain forms you have to fill out to apply for DACA, from the actual DACA application to the work permit that you have to submit. Once those are ready and your packet is complete, then you will have to provide the fee for the actual application, right? So the fee right now for DACA is $495 that, you will send with your application. Once USCIS receives your application, they will review it to make sure it's complete. And then they will send you a receipt notice saying, hey, we received your application, it's complete. We will review it and let you know whether you will be granted DACA or not. At that moment, usually applicants will get an appointment for fingerprinting, right? So they could go and USCIS will do its own background check to make sure that all the information you provided on the application is actually true, right? That you don't have any record that they should be aware of. And once they have that back, they will make an analysis on your case, and eventually you will get either an approval notice or a notice for more evidence or a notice that you have been denied. For people who have been renewing, a lot of times those notices sometimes come really quickly, and sometimes they could take months to actually get a final decision.
Great. No, I think that's helpful to sort of help folks establish that it may take, I think sometimes we want things to be done in the fastest way possible, but it could take a little bit longer. You mentioned that I think sometimes in the community, folks think it's just one application for DACA. But can you, I know that you already went through the process, but can you just enumerate the applications that when you submit a DACA package, I guess, what are the applications that are submitted? Is it just that a one DACA application, or is there multiple forms that are submitted?
Yeah, so for an initial DACA application, you're going to have a pretty big packet to submit to USCIS to say that your packet is complete, right? The first thing that you will have to fill out is what the consideration for DACA, right, which is the IA-21D. This will ask you information from your name, your address, where have you lived since you came into the United States, and also questions around whether you have ever been arrested or harmed someone, here in the United States or somewhere else. So that's the first one. That's the one that they'll use to decide whether you are going to get deferred action or not. Right? The second one is the I-765, which is the application for the work permit or employment authorization. This one will ask you similar information to the IA-21D, right? It'll also ask for your name and your address. But it'll also ask you for what type of work permit you're applying for, right? And that you will fill out. And also, when you entered the United States or when you last entered the United States. The next one that you'll have to fill out is the I-765 worksheet. And this one, they ask you to explain why you need a work permit, right? And a lot of people do a very short explanation, right? I need a work permit because I either want to continue going to school or I need to support my family, etc., right? Those are the three applications that are needed for DACA. In addition to this, you will also need the supporting documents showing that you meet the 7 eligibility requirements for DACA, right? Being here, your age, your education, right? And you will also need to submit with that the payment, right? So like we said, it's $4.95 to apply for DACA. Something that many people submit, but it's not necessarily required. It's an optional. It's the G1145. That one is so if you want to get notifications through a phone or an email, you could do that. You could give USCIS your cell phone and your email address, and they'll text you when they have received your application, right? So a lot of people do it because they like receiving text, right? We're now in a technology-driven world, right? So everybody's on their phone, so you might want to do that too, but it's not officially needed to consider your application complete. USCIS will need to see all these pieces in order for them to send you that receipt notice. If one of those applications is missing, they'll probably return your packet to you saying, hey, you didn't submit enough or a complete packet, right, for you to use.
Great. No, Veronica, thank you so much for all this information. I just have one last question for you before we wrap up this first video. Obviously, right now we're doing this virtually. Again, I know I mentioned in the beginning that we would have liked to do it in the same room, but because of COVID-19, we have to sort of do these sort of forums over virtual avenues. From your experience, are partners helping DACA recipients virtually? I know some DACA recipients are probably looking to get help, but are wondering if COVID-19 will be a barrier to them to be able to access help. From your experience speaking to partners, both locally, nationally, statewide, partners are continuing to sort of support DACA recipients through this process, even through the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. It's it's been a little difficult to get used to virtual living right now. Everybody's going to school via Zoom. Everybody's having meetings via Zoom. We're relying more than ever on technology, and that's the same thing that partners are doing. A lot of partners are continuing, or advocates are continuing to support DACA applicants. Some of them have even set up virtual workshops, right, so that they could go and screen. Some of them have online forms that you could fill out to request an appointment. They've started accessing or using online drives like Google Drive so that you could submit documentation. So the help is still there. People are still helping. We would just say to have a little patience with people when you reach out. We understand it's frustrating sometimes. Advocates don't get back to you right away, but just have a little patience and know that they are helping, but their process has changed and we're all learning what this new process looks like.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you I think we were able to share, you were able to share really rich information. I motivate the community to watch this. Obviously, that you watch this video, but if you have other questions, to rewind, to rewatch, to share this video. Again, this is a part 1 of a 2-part series. So through this video, we did an overview of where DACA is right now, some next steps, and some just practical tips. But I do invite the community to tune into our second video where we do a deeper dive on what documents folks will need to be able to provide evidence that they meet all the requirements for DACA. So having said all that, again, my name is Abraham. I am the Legal Outreach Coordinator, and thank you, Veronica, for being with me today, and hopefully this information will be helpful to the community. Having said that, thank you so much for joining us, and catch us in our next video.